Now for Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's premier Law Talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
Good morning and welcome to Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's Law Talk radio show. This is attorney Colleen Quinn of the law firm of Locke and Quinn. And today we're going to talk about Virginia's confusing court system and when you can get by without having an attorney and when you probably need to hire one in order to keep yourself out of hot water. And joining me today is attorney Kati Kitzstein, also of the law firm of Locke and Quinn. We're going to yin and yang a little bit about this topic. Feel free to call into the show if you've ever encountered a traffic ticket or you've got a family law dispute. In many, many cases, folks have confronted the court system in Virginia one way or the other, hopefully not from a criminal standpoint.
Right.
Yeah. And remember that Locke and Quinn is a personal services law firm located conveniently at Willow Lawn, where there is a mecca now of dining options, right? So you get your legal services, your estate planning, employment law, personal injury, family law. We do it all. And if we don't do it, we'll put you in the good hands of somebody that does. So, Kati, let's get going on this interesting topic. And we're going to try to do it in a more entertaining style than somebody might have in a civics or government class, right?
We'll do our best. Absolutely. So what are the most common types of courts that average folks encounter in Virginia?
I would say the two most common ones are the General District Court, where folks encounter traffic tickets, anything from a parking ticket to reckless driving. So, failure to yield. I think it's pretty hard to get by in life without, at some point, probably drawing a traffic ticket.
Right.
And then the other court would be probably the Juvenile Domestic Relations General District Court, which we call the JDR Court for short, Juvenile Domestic Relations Court, because usually it's unfortunate, but oftentimes in life somebody will encounter some sort of family dispute, whether it's custody, support, you're basically having to seek a protective order, you've got a juvenile delinquency problem. So the family law court is one that is pretty heavily used by most of the population.
Yeah. And those are our kind of lower level courts too. And so if those are sort of the first encounters that people are having, what if it doesn't go their way? Is that something, can people appeal from those courts?
Yeah, and so that's kind of an interesting thing. There's something called an appeal de novo, which means of new or being new. And so from both of those courts, if you get a bad ruling, you can appeal it for a brand new trial at the circuit court level. And that can be kind of a blessing or a curse, depending on the type of case. So let me tell a war story about my reckless driving ticket, okay, as by way of example. That actually turned out to be a blessing that I could appeal it to circuit court. So I had just gotten a brand new car, and now this was 16 years ago, so it's not so new anymore, but I had basically gotten rid of my 18-year-old Ford Explorer, which if it went over 60 miles an hour, it would shake and shimmy and whatever. So I got in a brand new car. I was on 288 going to court in Chesterfield and coming down a hill, looked at my phone because my client had called. That car did not shake and shimmy. It was brand new. So I wasn't used to the fact that it could go that fast. And I looked down at my phone to the right. I looked down to the left and I see a state trooper to my left. I look at my speedometer. I'm going 86 miles per hour. That is reckless driving.
Yes.
Anything over 80 is reckless driving. So I got pulled over. Obviously, I was very apologetic to the police officer. Told him I'd just gotten this car, didn't even realize that it could go that fast without shaking and shimmying like my old Ford Explorer. And of course, I got the ticket. And I went to the General District Court, figured, okay, I'm a lawyer, I can handle this myself. Well, and you can pretty much go to General District Court on traffic stuff, but reckless driving is a bit more serious.
Right.
It can result in the suspension of your license. So Go to General District Court, explain to the judge that I was an officer of the court.
Mm-hmm.
I barely got that out of my mouth. And he said, Miss Quinn, I don't care who you are. And he said, this is reckless driving. And I said, yes, sir, I'm so sorry. I've got a good driving record, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, well, he goes, I'm sorry, but I am going to suspend your license. And of course, I was just like, oh my God,
Right.
you know? And then he paused and then he goes, I'm going to suspend it for 6 months. And then he paused again. And of course, I'm just like crestfallen. And then he looked at me and he goes, but today is your lucky day because I'm going to suspend the suspension, so, which is basically I'm putting it on your record, but then I'm going to allow you to drive, but you have to pay all the fines, etc.
Right.
So then, of course, a lot of my lawyer friends came running up afterwards, and they're like, "What are you doing?" Because I don't do traffic court, and they said you need to appeal this right away for a brand new trial in circuit court. You need to go to driving school. So pretty much they gave me the advice that I would have gotten had I consulted a lawyer,
traffic
right?
lawyer.
Yeah, good traffic lawyer. Go up to circuit court level. At that point, I've gotten through driving school, etc. And the circuit court judge asked the trooper, "Was I polite, etc.?" And the trooper said yes. I was very polite, and I would cooperate it. And the circuit court judge said, "Well, I don't know why we're punishing a perfectly good driver. I'm going to drop this to driving with a defective part, basically, driving a vehicle, lesser, so a totally lesser charge and everything, which is good because I wouldn't get the same number of points.
Right.
And also with the driving school, it kind of counted the points, and then you have to worry about your auto insurance and everything. So that was a good outcome by having our court system and being able to have that trial run in General District Court and then being able to appeal it to the circuit court. So for traffic infractions, that's a good outcome. On the other hand, in family law court, if you get a result like on a child support case or whatever, which again in juvenile court, you can proceed without an attorney, but if the other side gets an attorney, you're at a distinct disadvantage. So in juvenile court, you can get a fairly quick outcome with the judge. In juvenile court, those cases move pretty fast, but then either side again can appeal it for a brand new trial in circuit court. And that's where the system is a little bit more of a curse. Yes, you get a second bite of the apple, but now, especially if you've got an attorney, you're running up your attorney fees to do it a second time around. But most people don't realize that our court system is set up that way, and it can be either a blessing or it can be a curse, depending on the type of case.
Yeah, I know we had some clients on a few weeks ago who were talking about how they had to do the trial all over again after they had been through a pretty emotional trial in the juvenile court on an adoption, and that was tough for them. So
yeah, to have to go through it another time around.
Yeah, after they felt like, all right, we won, somebody already made the decision, but then now we're starting from scratch and doing it all over again.
Yeah,
one level up. So, all right. So we've been talking about these kind of first level courts, the GDC, the General District Court, and the JDR courts. What are all of the different types of courts that we do have in Virginia?
Right. So those two are basically your entry level courts, and the ones where the clerks are pretty good working with you, that you can get by sometimes without a lawyer, of course, unless the other side has a lawyer. So when we think about our general district courts, we're thinking about the ones that we talked about, the traffic cases.
Right.
They handle the criminal cases involving minor offenses, misdemeanors, et cetera. They handle civil cases involving landlord-tenant disputes, collection actions, a lot of those type of lesser cases. Also, those courts, the general district courts, can do personal injury type cases, but there's a jurisdictional limit of $25,000. So that's the maximum that can be recovered in the general district court. There's no jury. It's a little bit more relaxed because it's just in front of the judge. So the rules of evidence, they're still there, but they're not quite as strict. You've got, in a personal injury case, rather than having to bring the actual doctors in to testify, you've got the ability to use affidavits. So you can use the general district court in a more cost-effective way to get recovery. But again, you do have the the de novo appeal, the ability to appeal it for a brand new trial in the circuit court. Then we also have the juvenile courts, and the juvenile court is basically the same level as the general district court. So these are called courts not of record,
Right.
So and the juvenile courts basically focus on those family law matters that we mentioned: custody, support, equitable distribution, protective orders, juvenile delinquency, those sorts of abuse, neglect cases, the termination of parental right cases by Department of Social Services.
Right. Adoption consents.
Adoption
for some
consents,
happier stuff.
right. For some happier stuff
Yeah.
in the juvenile court. Exactly. The judges are really happy when we come in and it's an adoption case and it's everybody's on the same page and this is what everybody wants and it's not being disputed. And again, of course, you've got the de novo appeal to circuit court.
Right.
So the circuit court then hears those appeals. Right. First of all. And then it also hears the criminal cases involving more serious offenses like felonies and, of course, the personal injury and medical malpractice and the bigger cases, bigger contract cases, commercial litigation cases, anything over the $25,000 limit are in those circuit courts. And so they can have jurisdiction over the lesser claims under $25,000, but if the case is worth more than $25,000, it has to be brought in the circuit court.
Right. So you're skipping that first level and going right to circuit court at that point.
Right. So if you have an auto case, or let's say you've got a breach of contract case, and it's you're fighting over $50,000, you're gonna have to file that one in circuit court, and it's pretty hard to get by in circuit court without an attorney. Yeah. At that point, you've got too many evidentiary rules, too many procedural things to overcome.
And you don't get the do-over with
the
appeal.
You don't get to do the trial run, where then you get to appeal it and get the brand new trial. So you're pretty much, at this point, this is your one shot at it.
And if you're not preserving your objections correctly and things like that, then you're going to be out of luck if you lose. So Exactly. And then from the circuit court, the appeal from that court will go either to the Court of Appeals or directly to the Supreme Court of Virginia. And that's not like a brand new trial. That's looking at the circuit court, what the trial court did in the circuit court, and seeing, do they abuse their discretion is typically the most common standard. There's other standards, but at that point, you can't add new evidence. You can't bring in new testimony, et cetera, except in certain circumstances. And so basically, at that point, it's just the court's reviewing what was done below. They're not taking new evidence or new testimony or listening to it as a brand new case. Right. Yeah. So, and then certain cases go automatically to the Court of Appeals if that's where you're appealing to, like family law and workers' comp cases, that sort of thing. But other cases, like personal injury cases, go up to the Court of Appeals. The Virginia Supreme Court. And then the Virginia Supreme Court has the discretion whether to take the case or not take the case. Right. So it's not necessarily even an automatic appeal. Exactly. So they can decide whether it's something they want to look at, whether it looks like there's some sort of issue in the law that they want to address, or whether it's just really not something that they feel there was any error or anything that they need to address. Yeah. Right. So what about all these other kind of phrases I think that people hear about court? You hear things like small claims court, magistrates, and intake officers. Where do all of those fit into this whole big system? Right. So it gets a little bit tricky, but so in the small claims court, basically the amount has to be less than $5,000. You don't have attorneys, you don't have formal rules of evidence. So this is the most user-friendly court for folks. They actually say you're not allowed to have attorneys in small claims court. So you don't have this issue of, well, the other side has one, now I have to hire one. Right. But the amount is under that $5,000. And that is in the general district court. And of course, the clerks are trained to be very helpful to help people. And this is just to try to resolve those really super small claims as between folks that are $5,000, or less than $5,000. Yeah. So that's a good court to know about if you do have a minor dispute, whether it's an engagement ring that you want back, right? Or you've got a rent deposit that you might want to get back from a landlord. You've got maybe an argument over having loaned somebody
$3,000 or
Right.
something, those sorts of smaller disputes between folks. So the magistrates, most folks will go to a magistrate especially if they need to swear out a warrant against somebody.
Right.
Maybe somebody stalking them, maybe somebody attacked them, assault and battery type case. So magistrates can issue warrants, summons, bonds, search warrants, subpoenas, and civil warrants. And they also can conduct bond hearings to set bail. And they can also accept prepayments for traffic infractions and minor misdemeanors. So a lot of criminal cases will start with the magistrate.
Yeah, before even getting to a court, you've got to deal with the warrant and the things like that.
So we had the case where the lady was on the Amtrak train, and remember the drunk on the Amtrak train basically attacked her. And so in that case, the Amtrak folks held him until the police could come, the Henrico police could come. And then she was immediately instructed by the Henrico police to get to the magistrate to swear out her warrant. And then the gentleman who attacked her remained held because he was on his way back to Florida. And so by doing that, she was able to get that warrant sworn out and to basically hold him there until they could basically set bond, set a date for him to come back on that personal attack, the assault and battery charge.
I actually had a good friend who was a magistrate for a while in Virginia, and because because this is the type of work they do, there always has to be a magistrate on duty. And since she was the newer magistrate, she got the 9 p.m. to 4 a.m.
She drew the short straw on that one.
Yeah, but she liked to tell people that she was a midnight judge because she thought that sounded cooler.
It does sound a lot better. Yeah. So your intake officers, your juvenile and domestic relations courts have intake officers who receive basically and review complaints and decide whether there are enough facts to involve the court. So basically they can decide whether a petition should be brought so that you can bring the matter before the judge. And they also can detain juveniles. So folks that are struggling with a juvenile delinquent at home, or you've got petty theft issues, they can kind of decide, is this something that can be handled by the family, or is this something where we've got to basically bring this child into the court system?
Right. And so again, it's kind of that first layer before you actually get into the JDR.
Right.
Court, it sounds like.
And so they don't handle criminal charges against adults that come into the juvenile court. Those go through the magistrate. So the intake officers are typically working a lot with those juveniles and the families, et cetera, there. And then drug court, because you hear that term too.
Right.
And that's not actually a separate court, but it's a program run through both the juvenile and general district courts relating to drug offenses. And so participants are closely monitored, but also given treatment and rehabilitation resources. So that gets a little bit confusing because you have these different names for the different courts, like small claims court, but that actually is general district court.
There's some of these are courts within courts.
Exactly. And drug court is not a separate court, but again, a program within either the general district or the juvenile courts.
Right. So where do protective orders get filed? Because we've talked about, JDR court being domestic relations issues, but also, criminal stuff being in either GDC or circuit court. So if you're someone who needs to get a protective order, where do you start?
Right. And so I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but generally if it involves a family member or somebody that you've lived with, or it involves children that you have in common, then usually you can go to the juvenile court for that protective order. If it involves somebody that you've not lived with, let's say Yardley Love, the UVA case where it was a boyfriend, but they weren't living together, et cetera. In that case, if she would have had gone generally to the general district court, but if she had sworn out a criminal complaint against him.
Yeah, because I think at the time the law has changed because of that case where she wouldn't have been able to get just a protective order. She would have had to swear out criminal charges against him because they weren't like married or living together or anything like that. And we've had some updates in the law to kind of remedy that gap there so that people can now get protective orders without having to, get swear out criminal charges against someone that, might be abusing or stalking or.
Exactly. So before the law change, in order for her to get that protective order, she couldn't go to family court because he wasn't a family member. She hadn't lived with him. They didn't have children in common. And so she'd have to go to the general district court, and then she could swear out a criminal complaint, and that would automatically then get her into the system for getting the protective order. And now, exactly right, since that law change, she doesn't have to actually bring the criminal complaint. She can go to the general district court and still get the protective order.
Yeah.
Without actually, because that's really tough when you love somebody, but you're scared of them, but you and you really don't want them to have a criminal record.
Right.
So that was a great change, in great reaction to that particular situation.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about our state courts in Virginia, and just all these courts we've been talking about so far are their state courts. Where do federal courts fit in? Because that is a whole different.
That's a whole different
system.
beast. Yeah, a whole different ball of wax.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's certain crimes that give the federal court jurisdiction.
Right.
We had the case with the person involved in being attacked because of a hate crime.
Right.
And basically, in that case, where the hate crime happened, also was in the stream of in a business that had certain stream of commerce that crossed state lines, and so there are certain crimes. For example, basically, when you have crimes that cross state lines or that invoke federal
I think
statute.
Even if you're like speeding in a federal park, you end up having to go to federal court for for your traffic ticket. I mean, there are just very specific things that are violations of specifically federal law.
Yeah.
That you're going to end up in federal court for your speeding ticket if you're doing it in the wrong place.
Right. And so there's certain crimes that invoke federal jurisdiction. There are a number of employment claims where there's concurrent jurisdiction, like under Title VII and Fair Labor Standards Act, Family Medical Leave Act, et cetera. And basically, those are federal laws. And so while you may be able to file in state court, a lot of times they get removed to federal court because federal court and federal laws preempt state court in those cases. And then there's this crazy thing where if you are suing somebody that's in another state, okay, and the amount in controversy is more than $75,000, then that basically allows that person to either remove the case from state court or you file directly in federal court. And it's called diversity of citizenship. So basically, it's to give that person in the other state a fair shake by not having to be stuck with being sued in
the court of another
court
state.
of Virginia, right? So we are about to cut to the break, but we are talking about Virginia's crazy court system today and when you need a lawyer and when you don't need a lawyer. And feel free to call into the show at 804-454-1366 if you've got any questions about the court system.
You've been listening to Raising the Bar, Greater Richmond's premier law talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason in Washington. The three Americans who had been held captive in North Korea now headed back to the U.S. with Secretary of State Pompeo. That word this morning in a tweet from President Trump. Mr. Trump says he'll be at Andrews Air Force Base at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning to greet the former captives as they arrive back home. Anger in the Iranian parliament after the president took the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal. The familiar refrain, "Death to America," has been heard, and Iranian lawmakers also burning an American flag. President Trump tweeting congratulations to the winners of yesterday's Republican primaries. Winners include Patrick Morrisey in West Virginia. He'll take on Democrat Senator Joe Manchin in the November election. Stocks opening higher this morning on Wall Street. The Dow is up about 3 points. More details at srnnews.com.
Dennis Prager here again, happily telling you about Relief Factor and my wife's knee pain that is gone because of Relief Factor. I'm taking it, and it lowers my pain as well. A lot of people have muscle or joint pain. Our housekeeper's husband couldn't work any longer because of back pain, so we gave him Relief Factor, and now he's back to work. Can I guarantee it will work for you? Of course not. But the majority of people who tried the 3-week quick start for just $19.95 go on to order more. Give it a try at relieffactor.com.
Stop by Lowe's, where great buys are in bloom to help you with all the projects popping up on your to-do list. Add a pop of color to your porch or patio with 2 for $16 premium hanging baskets. And get pint annuals 5 for $5. So what are you waiting for? Let's get growing. All projects have a starting point. Start with Lowe's. Offers valid May 2nd through May 9th while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Get your daily inspiration on our sister station, the Truth Network of Richmond, on AM 590 and 107.9 FM. The Truth Network is now on 107.9 FM. Just up the dial. For 24 hours of encouragement, enjoy 107.9 FM. Realign your focus on the most important things. Just turn your dial to our sister station, the Truth Network of Richmond, on 590 AM and 107.9 FM.
John Frederick.
And Rod Rothenstein is nothing but a stooge of Robert Mueller. They are attempting to isolate and wear this president down. We ought to be calling him MLS, Mueller's little stooge. This guy is a complete lackey. He says yes to whatever Robert Mueller wants.
He wants you to listen to the John Frederick Show.
Certainly, I love it.
Weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. on WNTW AM 820 and 97.7 FM.
Now, back to Raising the Bar. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
We are back. This is attorney Colleen Quinn of the law firm of Block and Quinn, and today we are talking about Virginia's crazy court system and when can you get by without a lawyer and when do you really need a lawyer. And so we have talked about the primary courts that folks typically encounter, and that is the General District Court for traffic infractions and also the Juvenile Domestic Relations Court, we call the JDR Court, for family law issues. Of course, if you're not really careful, if you get into trouble, then you're going to encounter the General District Court too on a crime, right, if you're not really careful. So we've been talking about those kind of easy to use court systems, and then it gets a little harder as you get up to the circuit court level. And then right before the break, we were talking about actually federal court, and federal court is about impossible to navigate without an attorney if you're in federal court.
Right. They have a lot of very, very strict procedures and rules that if you don't follow them, they're happy to toss your case right on out.
Right. So. Right. And then we were talking about courts within those courts, because we've got the small claims court in the General District Court, and we've got the drug court within the General District and juvenile courts. And so those are kind of courts within those courts. What we didn't talk about was, because people get a little bit confused, but workers' compensation claims start with the Workers' Compensation Commission. So that doesn't start necessarily in the traditional state court system. But still, those claims are kind of adjudicated, before a commissioner, which is basically a judge. And those claims can then get appealed through Virginia's court system, through the Court of Appeals.
But in those cases, you're almost having your trial before the administrative, that administrative hearing is your trial, and then your appeal is basically based on what happened in that trial. So you don't want to mess up that administrative level hearing.
So folks that do encounter workers' comp claims, that is going to be in a more administrative style trial before a commissioner. Same thing with unemployment claims
Yep.
that go through the Virginia Employment Commission, the VEC.
Mhm.
So, and those can be appealed to the circuit court,
Mhm.
but that is not a brand new trial. You're pretty much stuck with whatever happened in the administrative proceedings level in the Virginia Employment Commission.
Right.
It gets really kind of crazy sometimes because folks are a little unsure of how our systems work,
Mhm.
but we've had lots of folks go through the Virginia Employment Commission and then contact us after they've gone up through the appeals in the Virginia Employment Commission and then contact us to handle their case. And we have to explain, hey, at this point, you're stuck with whatever
Right.
happened below, because even though you do have an appeal to circuit court, you're stuck with that evidence,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? And so it does get a little confusing because on the other hand, if we had, we were talking earlier about when you have a case in general district court, like a traffic ticket,
Mhm.
or you have a custody or support case in juvenile court, you get a brand new trial to
Uh-huh.
circuit court and you get to reintroduce your evidence and do it all over again.
Uh-huh.
And you don't get to do that once you've gone through the workers' comp commission or you've gone through the unemployment commission.
Yeah. So people have to be careful about those administrative hearings and procedures, and maybe you do need a lawyer at that level.
Right.
For some of those. Social Security, I think, is another one that, it's a lot very administrative. Sometimes with social services, they'll have decisions that, go through that administrative process. And yeah, it's, I think people lock themselves into things before realizing, oh, maybe I should have hired a lawyer 6
A
months
lot
ago.
earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that I'm stuck with the evidence that I put in.
Mhm.
So we were going to talk a little bit, Katie, about how a personal injury case in general district court differs from one in circuit court.
Right, because you have that certain amount of money where you can file in either.
Right.
You kind of have that area between, I think it's 4,500 and 25,000. You're allowed to file in either general district court, or you can go straight to circuit court with your case. So what are the differences and why might you choose one over the other?
Well, if it's not a really big case, if it's under 25,000, you typically will want to file it in general district court and not circuit court because it's going to cost you a lot less.
Yep.
You don't get a jury in general district court. You
Mhm.
do get a jury in circuit court, but you don't always necessarily want a jury. Sometimes a judge is going to give you a better result
Mhm.
in general district court. When I mentioned you don't have to spend as much, you don't in circuit court, you have to actually bring your doctors live or get them by video deposition.
Yep.
In general district court, you can bring in the doctor evidence through affidavits,
Mhm.
so they can basically say, yeah, these are your injuries, these are your medical bills in an affidavit. That's
Right.
a lot less expensive than paying some, anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 to bring a doctor to trials.
Your doctor will charge you
Yeah,
to come to trial for you.
exactly. And so bringing it in that general district court can have a lot of advantages
Mhm.
sometimes. Now, and you could do the personal injury case on your own, but still there are enough procedural things where you probably, if it's a personal injury type case or a commercial litigation or contract
Right.
type case, you probably still do want to have a lawyer even in general district court. But you'll get a trial a lot faster, you'll get an outcome a lot faster, and you don't have the same discovery rules. Like you don't get to get involved in depositions
Right.
and the exchange of what we call interrogatories and written questions without getting too technical. But
Mhm.
it's just a lot less complicated in the general district court if it's a smaller type of case.
Right. And then you get the do-over.
Right.
So why wouldn't you start at the lower level so you get the
de novo, the brand new appeal.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you don't like the outcome in the general district court.
Right.
So it's sometimes difficult to explain to folks why you'd want to go that route if their case is worth less than 25,000, but there are a lot of good reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've been talking about, generally mentioning sometimes you can manage to get by without a lawyer, sometimes you really need one. So really, what are the situations where you have to have a lawyer? You really should have a lawyer to go to court.
Well, if it is a fairly complicated case,
Mhm.
you're definitely going to want to have a lawyer. If it's a more serious charge, if it's a traffic infraction and it's a DUI,
Yep.
or in my case with that reckless driving
Mhm.
ticket, I really needed to consult a lawyer. If it's a lesser traffic infraction, like I also at one point got a turning. It was basically failing to adhere to the turn lane line. Okay, so this was out in Short Pump, the West End, before it got expanded to as many lanes as it had, and basically I got into the left-hand turn lane before the turn lane line was drawn. Okay, but if you didn't get into the turn lane before the turn lane line was drawn, then you were not going to get into that turn lane because traffic had just gotten so bad out there. And so I can't remember exactly the infraction, but it was effectively, failing to follow the lines of the road. So, and because I don't do criminal or traffic work, I don't know the specific statutory infraction that it was. So in that one, the judge was in the general district court was very familiar with the traffic problem out there at that time. And I was able to draw a diagram, et cetera, and be able to show that if you didn't get into that turning lane early, you were going to be stuck because people weren't so nice about letting you in
because other people were getting in.
Because they were getting in that early. And otherwise they considered you a cutter, like you'd be cutting in line. So anyway, that was an easy one to go in on, as a litigant, not an attorney, and then have the judge say, yeah, I agree with you. They need to change the lines out there. And eventually they did not only change the lines, but they expanded the roads and, and now you've got 2 turning lanes with a light and everything because it's gotten so bad. So that's one of those cases where you can say, hey, if it's a pretty minor traffic infraction, you might be able to get by without an attorney. If it's just a child support issue and the person on the other side, the spouse or ex-spouse or whatever, doesn't have an attorney, you might be able to get by.
Right.
Protective orders, oftentimes, the clerk's office is really, really good. I actually had to get a protective order myself at one point against someone that was stalking, and one of my girlfriends just kind of held my hand and we got over there, and the clerk's office they were fabulous about walking us through that. So that was a good one where don't necessarily need to have an attorney. Name changes.
Right.
There are some simple things that the clerk's office is really good about helping you with.
Where they just have forms that you say, I want to do this, and they give you the form, you fill it out right there and pay, whatever fee you need to pay. And
so a name change. But then on the other hand, a step-parent adoption, that's now getting a little bit more complicated.
Yep.
And so you probably need an attorney. Divorce, you're going to need an attorney. So when things start to get a little bit more complicated, and you can talk to the clerk's office, but the clerk's offices will pretty much tell you need to get an attorney. If it's something that's getting a little bit more complicated.
The clerks are great to help you with procedures. What they can't do is give you legal advice.
Right.
And when your case starts to get more complicated, you kind of hit the limit of what they're allowed to help you with. If it's just kind of navigating, how does your court do this? Or, is there a form for this? That they can be great, which is why you want to be very nice to the clerks.
Right. Yes.
Because even for lawyers, they can be very, very helpful. Or if you make them angry, then they can make your life very, very difficult. So.
Yeah. And the judges try to bend over backwards for pro se plaintiffs, and also will try to give a clue and say, hey, you may want to consult with a lawyer, especially if they're going to miss some procedural deadline, if there's some technicality that's going to get their case thrown out. So it's just, I think folks need to listen to the clerks and the judges when they're kind of giving them a hint. Hey, this may be something that you can't really handle yourself. And you might need to hire somebody.
Absolutely. So what are some of these little technicalities that people should probably be aware of that they probably need a lawyer to help them navigate?
So filing in the right court. Yeah, that's a really big one. We've talked about the different courts, so you need to make sure you're filing in the right one, and also in the right location, the right venue.
So it's not just the right level of court. You also have to make sure you're filing, if you should be filing in Henrico instead of Richmond, that you're filing in the Henrico General District Court instead of the Richmond one. Or
Right. And so making sure that you're in that right jurisdiction is really important. The drafting of pleadings. Sometimes there are cases like a divorce case where there's not going to be a form from the clerk's office that they're going to give you for that. So getting proper service.
That's a very tricky one.
You can screw that up. knowing the statute of limitations and deadlines, suing the right person or right entity, because if you sue the wrong person, you don't have the name right. We had just had that. There was the case that came down recently from the Virginia Supreme Court where they basically held that where the person sued the wrong defendant in a car accident case, and they thought they were given one name, but it was actually another name, that they sued the wrong person. So
Right,
that
and
case
then
got thrown out.
because at that point the statute of limitations had run, and you can't just sue someone at any time after they wrong you. You have a deadline where you have to bring that lawsuit.
Right.
So
So like in personal injury cases, it's 2 years in Virginia. So finding coverage, insurance coverage, that preserving objections, and knowing when you've got a problem with your case really early on. There could be immunity issues like sovereign immunity, et cetera. So there are just certain cases like personal injury cases, commercial litigation cases, some breach of contract cases that you really just are going to have to hire an attorney or at a minimum consult with an attorney early on.
right. And then there's also, I mean, I think this is sort of maybe not as specific, but attorneys are in the courts a lot. They know the bailiffs and the judges and the clerks and things like that. And that can be really helpful in your case if you're walking into a court and are completely unfamiliar with it. Just having someone there who knows the people you're dealing with and is familiar with the system that you're in can be hugely helpful.
Oh yeah, I mean,
well.
knowing the judges' personalities, knowing their particular likes and dislikes and quirks and whatnot. You certain judges are going to want you to stand all the time. Other judges are, they're going to prefer that you sit if you get permission to sit.
Right.
I mean, it's just all those little kind of nuances in terms of what certain judges like or don't like, et cetera.
So you mentioned that in a lot of cases, you need to at least consult with a lawyer. And that brings up kind of an interesting issue, which is this idea of sort of having a lawyer ghostwrite for you, where they're not fully representing you, they're not going to court with you, but they're kind of maybe helping you. What's allowed there and what's not?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of back and forth in Virginia whether attorneys can ghostwrite on cases or not, and a lot of discussion with the legal aid societies, et cetera. But the general rule is that you can get in trouble if you are what we call ghostwriting, which is, let's say my brother has a breach of contract case. I don't know, maybe he hired a subcontractor or he's hired somebody to do work around his house. And he basically says, hey, Colleen, can you draft a lawsuit for me against this person without me actually signing off on the pleadings and letting him sign off on the pleadings? That's called ghostwriting. It's basically I'm the ghost writing it for him.
Right.
And I can get in trouble by doing that. So the general rule is that ghostwriting is at this point not really prohibited. So I would basically just need to say, hey, bro, either you got to do it on your own or I'll step in and be your lawyer.
Right. But you can't do the middle ground.
Right.
I just want to pay for an hour of your time and then do the rest of it on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we sort of talked about when you need a lawyer, when you don't. When do you get a lawyer appointed by the court?
Yeah, so that depends really on two factors: the type of case and the ability to pay. If it's basically if you're a criminal defendant facing jail time, then you're going to be entitled to an attorney. If you haven't hired one and can't afford one, then the court's not going to. It's basically when you have certain freedoms or fundamental constitutional rights that are at issue. So if you're a parent facing the termination of your parental rights, so Department of Social Services has removed the children from your home due to abuse and neglect, and they're looking at terminating your parental rights. That's a certain fundamental constitutional right. So you've got the fundamental constitutional right to parent your kids. You've got the fundamental constitutional right not to be locked up, So and unless you truly have done something really bad so that you deserve to be locked up. So in those cases, that's when you can get a court-appointed attorney. And also in some cases, a guardian ad litem might be appointed if the person is a minor under age 18, if they're incapacitated or disabled adult, if there's somebody that's under, they've mental retardation or they've got other serious handicaps, Down syndrome, whatever it might be. And then, of course, if you have an incarcerated defendant in a civil case too, due to certain civil crimes. So maybe you might have a case where, well, failure to pay child support is actually more criminal, but if the person is incarcerated and you're trying to sue them on a civil claim, let's say you've had an auto accident with that person, and then they went and they basically got arrested for embezzlement or something, then because they're incarcerated,
they're under a disability.
They're considered to be under a disability in Virginia. Yeah. Or let's say they're incarcerated for a variety of things, and you are seeking to do a step-parent adoption and terminate their rights.
Right.
Then they would be entitled to get a guardian ad litem.
Right.
Yeah.
So when do you not get a free? Because I think a lot of people think, well, if I can't afford an attorney, the court will appoint one. That's what you hear on TV. So when is that not true, even if you can't afford an attorney?
Yeah. So if you're the one bringing the case, you're like the plaintiff bringing a civil case, you're not going to get a free attorney.
Right.
And if you're the defendant in a civil case and you're not under age 18, you're not an incapacitated or disabled adult, and you're not incarcerated on a felony,
right.
You're not going to be entitled to an attorney there either. So there is a lot of confusion about when you get an attorney or not. I mean, it's kind of like when you have that fundamental constitutional right to parent, or that fundamental constitutional right not to be locked up, or you're under one of those disabilities of being a minor or having some sort of mental type handicap or disability, or you're that incarcerated defendant on a felony case. So the concept is that you can't necessarily protect yourself with those fundamental constitutional rights. So we do have a caller on the line. We have Austin from Richmond. And Austin, are you there?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. I hope you hadn't answered them already. My first is, I don't think you mentioned when you get what situations you would get a court-appointed attorney, but I don't think you elaborated on what the qualification was for not being able to afford one. So can I drive up in a Mercedes and say that I can't afford one and just get a free lawyer, or what's the criteria for that?
Well, if you drive up in a really old beat up Mercedes and then you show that your income is really low, and actually a really good friend gave you that Mercedes because they felt really sorry for you because you were at such a poverty level. So by way of example, let's say that you are going to have the rights to your children terminated because somebody's trying to do a step-parent adoption and terminate the rights because, Austin, you have allowed yourself to drop so low in life that you basically don't have much money. You've got this Mercedes that somebody's given to you, but it's a beat up old Mercedes. And so you go into the court and you say, look, I'm a good dad. I don't want my parental rights terminated in the step-parent adoption, but I can't afford an attorney. So basically the court's going to give you a form to fill out to show what your income is, what your expenses are. And then if you are able to show that you are under that particular poverty line, the court's going to say, yes, this is a case that involves a fundamental right, that is your right to parent. And even though you did show up in a Mercedes, I can see that it's a beat up old Mercedes. It's not worth much. You're not making enough money. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to appoint an attorney for you because this is a fundamental constitutional right. On the other hand, if you show up in a really nice, shiny, brand new Mercedes and you are an investment banker or stockbroker, and you live in a super nice house and you are doing quite fine, and you basically show up in your brand new expensive suit, and you go in before the judge and you've got a Rolex watch on your wrist, and you basically say, well, I can't afford an attorney. Well, if the court gives you that same form and you basically fill it out and you show that you clearly can afford an attorney, the judge is going to say, well, sorry, but you can't afford an attorney, and so we're not going to appoint one for you. And so basically that's kind of how that system works, is you've got to show the court that you truly are unable to afford that attorney in order to get one appointed. So does that kind of clarify the question a little bit more, Austin?
It does. I hope this isn't a rabbit trail, but I do have one more question.
Absolutely.
Is this a wholly objective criteria, or is this a slightly subjective criteria? Because it seems like there would be two things going on there. One would be the poverty line, and the other one would be what your income versus expenses are.
Well, that is a really good question, because it's objective in terms of what the number
form,
cutoff is, the form is, but it's completely subjective in terms of, what gets listed on that form. So the court's not going to go to your house and see that your utility bill is actually for sure what you put down.
Yeah.
But you do have to swear it out under oath, under criminal convictions, if you have swayed, if you've taken a little too much liberty in terms of what your income and your expenses are. So you pretty much need to be as honest as possible, right, without getting yourself into criminal hot water if you've kind of veered off of what the actual numbers are a little bit too much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does answer my question. So
great. Thank you for calling in. All right. So that was an awesome question from Austin.
Yeah.
And of course, that applies to in the criminal cases where you're looking at fundamental liberties.
Right. And that sort of gets us into this topic. We've been talking a lot about civil cases and personal injury and, domestic relations. But now we're getting a little bit into criminal cases. This is when you think of the two big areas of law, you have a lot of people who say, I'm a criminal lawyer. I'm, largely a civil lawyer. What are some of the big differences between a civil case and a criminal case?
Right. So in a criminal case, you're pretty much looking at losing your freedom of movement and being locked up, or having to pay an enormous fine. So if we look at criminal law, somebody can be jailed, fined, put on probation. Basically, you've got your fundamental liberty interests in being able to freely move around at issue. Civil law is basically tied more to private rights and remedies like property, commerce, administrative stuff.
Yeah.
So family law, child support, all that falls under the civil side. But if somebody is being held liable for a lot of child support, they could be subject to criminal penalties. So there is, again, that's crazy confusion over the court system sometimes. So, and a person can be charged with a crime and held liable under both civil law and criminal law. Let's say an assault and battery.
Yeah, the state's going to come after you for criminal charges.
Right.
Because the state's always on the other side in a criminal case.
Right.
But the individual you hurt can come after you for money in a civil case.
Right. The victim can come after you. So there are a number of cases where you can have both civil and criminal ramifications. And I think an assault and battery is one of the key examples that are out there. Also, let's say getting a DUI and causing an accident.
Yep.
You can be charged with the criminal side of the DUI, but you can also have the civil personal injury case for the auto accident.
Absolutely.
So we have been talking today about Virginia's crazy court system. And when do you need a lawyer, and when do you get one, and when do you not? And so join us next week on Raising the Bar when Jeremy Pryor is going to talk about estate planning. So another topic that folks need to know about.
Absolutely.
Where is the best news and talk? AM 820 WNTW Chester is the answer.
News this hour from townhall.com. I'm Rich Thomason. President Trump says the U.S. has won the release of 3 Americans detained in North Korea.